The full episode is now available on Patreon and YouTube memberships. Please see the link in the description for more details.
Well, I was going to ask, like, from a starting point, like, are you a lover of the Silmarillion?
I'm excited that you brought that up. I absolutely love the Silmarillion, and I know you aren't the biggest fan.
Damn it! See, I was actually going to ambush Preston and with this whole thing of like, Preston, you don't like the Silmarillion.
Let's get him. Let's get him. For me, so I get how it feels disorienting as a book, but for me, it's almost like a piece of art that's so impressionistic and almost like romantic era in a sense. Like it almost is a book that was written in just an era a long time ago where it's so, I mean, you read the first part of the book, the Ainu Lindale, the music of the Ainur, and it feels like you're walking through an art piece almost. It feels just like you're in the middle of a song. And it is really disorienting, especially if you read like, all right, I'm going to read The Hobbit and then I'm going to read the Silmarillion. It's like, it's very different.
Yeah. Well, even The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings are so violently different that it's,
totally.
It's hard to even imagine that it's the same universe or the same author.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And again, there's always that part where it's like the Silmarillion wasn't quite finished by the time Tolkien passed away. But to be honest, I don't know if he ever would have finished it to his liking exactly because he was making so many changes constantly. But for what we got, for what Christopher Tolkien, his son, put together, I absolutely love it. And it's so complex, but if you follow each character's like story arc and each character through, usually all of them die pretty much in the first stage, unfortunately. So if you follow them from their birth to their death, and you do that for all the characters, it actually becomes a very cohesive narrative and a cohesive world pretty fast.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a compliment to Christopher Tolkien that he was able to take all of these kind of random. I mean, some people say it was just kind of this big stash of random notes, and that Christopher Tolkien like was able to craft it into a book. You know?
Yeah, and it's I actually thought it was going to be more note-ish when I first read it, but when I read it, I was like, oh, this is like the chapters are pretty cohesive, even if they jump all around, all over the place. Now the notes, if you look at the 12-part History of Middle-earth saga. That he's released like since the Silmarillion, pretty much through the late 1990s and 1980s and everything. If you look at all those are so hard to read because those are just pretty much the notes with little bits of commentary here and there. And also the notes contradict themselves; they contradict each other all the time. So that's really hard. But if you kind of throw all of that aside and just read the Silmarillion as it is, it's really complex, but it's actually, by the end of it, you'll say, oh, okay, that's actually pretty cohesive, chapter to chapter. Yeah.
Guys, I'm going to throw you under the bus again, and we did a Lord of the Rings versus Game of Thrones video like way back when. It's on Patreon.
Oh yeah.
And Preston, you said something along the lines of, I don't like the Silmarillion because it's all songs and poems and all that stuff.
Yeah,
that's no main story.
I think also like. What weirds me out is the fact that it starts out talking about gods and creation, and it's a story of God and the devil, and then it takes a long time before you're really talking about people, that you can relate to.
Totally.
So I think that might be also one of the things that I didn't like how it started. I think it actually gets better as it goes on, but
Yeah, that makes sense. I could see how that's disorienting. I think I actually remember that video. I remember Preston saying that about all the songs and everything. If you go through the Silmarillion, I want to say that there's close to no, compared to the Lord of the Rings, there's close to no songs or poems. So the Lord of the Rings, especially the Fellowship of the Ring, it's just like every couple pages a song, poem. But Silmarillion, it's really complex. It's almost like it's written in verse, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I forget if I was making that comment. I might have been making that comment about Lord of the Rings, like how they made the series, even though the series is brighter than say Game of Thrones or Wheel of Time, it's still much more dour than the actual Lord of the Rings book. Like when they go to the inn. Like, and Frodo dances on the table and has like 2 fucking pages of song. And then you watch the movie and it's this dark, shady, inn where everyone's like looking at each other and you're like, this wasn't what about the jolly dancing?
Absolutely. And it's funny. Like as you get deeper, especially into the notes of the history of Middle Earth and everything, you see how it's all written as a frame narrative because, right, you have Bilbo and Frodo who write down their adventures, but eventually the Lord of the Rings that we read has been altered by Gondorian scholars. It's been changed over generations. It's been altered by different hobbits, things like that.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, so the book that Frodo gives Sam when he sails west, Sam eventually gives that to his daughter, but then a copy of that is made by Pippin, I want to say. It's the Thane's book, and then Pippin and Merry change and add bits of their own. They bring it to Gondor, and then a Gondorian scholar eventually, adds things, or many scholars, they add things and change things, and then that is the version that we receive. And so it could be said that actually those songs never actually happened in the tale, but were added thereafter by, Pippin, who was just like, yeah, sure, I'll just write a song. Sure, I'll just say that Frodo sang, You can always make that argument, that whole frame narrative argument.
So you're saying my over analyzing House of the Dragon beginning, where I said that the Silmarillion was not supposed to be questioned, is wrong. That these are actually they actually are different versions that aren't necessarily trusted.
Absolutely, because that's a funny thing, that the trustworthiness. Bilbo, I want to say in his original telling of Riddles in the Dark with Gollum, he lies about it. He says Gollum gives him the One Ring because he feels bad for him stealing it. And I want to say that that's actually what he wrote in the Red Book, but eventually somebody learned the truth and changed it back to the truth.
I mean, that's a very nice way of dealing with a retcon.
Absolutely, yeah, because Tolkien himself, yeah, absolutely. But I love that idea because it's like, okay, well, how trustworthy of a narrator is Bilbo? How trustworthy is Frodo? And then you add that to the fact that the Silmarillion, I want to say, was compiled by Bilbo when he was living in the House of Elrond, when he was in Rivendell. He found all of the notes and all of the things like that, so he compiled the Silmarillion himself, and then added that to the Red Book and added that to the compendiums that went to Gondor eventually.
I see. So you're saying that there's a possibility that there is no God in the Lord of the Rings universe, that Yuvatar is actually kind of made up.
Either you could theoretically make the argument that the elves made him up, that Bilbo made him up, or that somebody along the way made him up.
I see.
Preston, stop ruining Lord of the Rings. He does this all the time. He takes the fun and magic out of it. It's the curse of every Ice and Fire YouTuber.
I'm just saying it kind of makes it more interesting. Like, what if there really was no years of lamps and years of trees, and that was all just some bullshit that people made, to justify where Sauron came from. Like, there was no devil, but in order to get people to fight him, they made up this myth that he was the servant of the devil in order to rally people.